as the 20th of January, the date that President Donald Trump will assume the office of the President of the United States approaches, both Russia and Ukraine are intensifying the conflict to the maximum possible so that they have the advantage when it comes to negotiations. Russian troops are just 3 kilometers from the strategic logistic hub of Petrovsk, and they are just about 8 kilometers from the Dnieper thereafter. Ukrainians know they are losing the war on the ground. There is no way they can win. Russia is mounting relentless pressure every day. It's taken about 220 square kilometers just in this month, and about 12 major villages and settlements have been captured. And even in the Kursk, it is mounting fierce attacks. So Ukraine knows it is losing the ground war, but it is trying to win the media war of optics. It is trying to mount a series of drone strikes, clandestine missions, terrorist attacks to somehow keep itself in the limelight, somehow keep its resistance in the media channels all over the globe, and try and claim a Pyrrhic victory, try and tell Donald Trump that it has a hope in hell of winning. It's not very convincing, but the attempt is there to create the optics of a Ukraine which is resisting fiercely. President Joe Biden seems quite clear that if he can help it, he will try and start a third world war before he demits office. Donald Trump, as we all know, has promised to the whole world that on the day he takes charge, he will try and bring about a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, a ceasefire in situ. They are talking in terms of getting European troops to man the buffer zone, etc., which is by itself a bit of an oxymoron, because Russia went to war to keep sure that NATO would stay out of Ukraine. So how Russia will accept that is a big question mark. Russia is also saying that it will only negotiate with a government that is legitimate. And Zelensky has outlived his date, because he should have, his government was over, the tenure of his government was over a few months back. And because of that emergency, he is hanging on to power without elections. Russia considers his regime illegitimate and will only, it says, negotiate with a country or with somebody whose hold on power is legitimate, so that whatever agreement that has been signed, can be made to stick. So that is the situation right now facing the world. Like I said, Joe Biden, who for almost his entire tenure of 4 years refrained from taking certain provocative actions like permitting Ukraine to use the HIMARS and the ATACMS inside Russian territory, has now started firing on all cylinders. Like I said, he seems keen to start a third world war. So Donald Trump's hopes of trying to bring about peace and order and focus on his agenda of taking on the deep state in America, of repairing the American economy, and of rebuilding American depleted stocks of ammunition and missiles, etc. He needs a period of 2 to 3 years minimum of peace and quiet. And he has to end the ongoing wars in Europe and in the Middle East. Joe Biden now seems hell-bent to see that Donald Trump does not get that clean start, does not get that reprieve to restructure the deep state. And there seems to be something more sinister, which I shall come to a little later. It seems bizarre, but is Joe Biden trying to provoke a nuclear conflict? Is he trying to provoke a widening of the conflict, a total widening of the conflict in Europe to involve other NATO states. What could be the design behind that, behind such extreme provocation? To create the conditions for a third world war in which Russia crosses the nuclear Rubicon or extends the conflict horizontally, escalates the conflict horizontally to other NATO countries, and then can emergency be declared, and can Joe Biden refuse to hand over power to Donald Trump, overturn the results of the American election? It's a bizarre scenario, but one that, it is not difficult to put it beyond the deep state in America, which seemed desperate that it has lost the electoral battle to Donald Trump and he is going to come back to power. They did everything in their power to get him out and to keep him out. But now that he is coming to power, will they try such desperate shenanigans? I don't really think so. But then the way the Biden administration is going in its desperation to create a third world war, to spoil the chances of Donald Trump's smooth start of his tenure, you can't put anything past that deep state. So far, Russia has been exercising extraordinary levels of restraint. It had threatened to go nuclear, it had mobilized its nuclear arsenal, the Sarmats and the intercontinental ballistic missiles had all been pulled out and sent to action stations. But it responded in a very methodical manner by using the Orshenik, by carrying out a battle test of the Orshenik in live conditions. It attacked the Ukrainian missile plant in Dnipro and blasted it to bits by that intermediate range hypersonic ballistic missile of the Orshenik, which uses the kinetic energy of Mach 11, Mach 13 to just penetrate deep underground and blast all deeply buried bunkers by sheer kinetic energy. And one or two or a few more Orsheniks can be enough to devastate any European or American base. They have been exercising restraint, and that restraint makes sense. Putin knows that Biden is on his way out. He is gone desperate enough, stark, raving bonkers to try and start a third world war to prevent either Donald Trump from taking over, or if he does take over, prevent him from getting a smooth start, being able to unfold his agenda of tackling the deep state in America and restoring the American economy and the American war fighting capability. He needs a couple of years to get that going. So the point at issue is that Russia knows that Donald Trump is coming and Biden is on his way out. It makes practical sense then for Russia to keep its cool till such time as Donald Trump takes over, not get provoked before that to create a kind of an extraordinary situation in which Biden and the deep state could perhaps try and prevent Donald Trump from taking over by giving the excuse that a third world war has started, an emergency has been declared, and they will have to continue. The existing mad regime will have to continue. So the fact of the matter is that Russia, the restraint that Russia has been showing, despite very grave provocations, is understandable. It makes a lot of sense. If Biden is going as it is, why let him succeed in his agenda of provocation? He's trying to send as many weapons, as much financial aid and military aid to Ukraine as possible before he goes into the sunset. But since that is not doing much damage, despite all the hoopla, it's not doing much damage. Therefore, it makes eminent sense, horse sense, for Putin to play it cool, to wait out this, very dangerous phase of Biden's last phase of lunacy, so that before he goes into the sunset, he cannot trigger a third world war or trigger a wider conflict in Europe. So I think Putin will try and wait him out. He will not get provoked, allow himself to be provoked into emotive reactions which can help the United States and NATO and the other countries to escalate the war beyond levels of common sense, beyond the levels of common sense. Now, with this as a backdrop, let's take a look at the strategies that Russia and Ukraine are adopting individually. Russia has accelerated its offensive in eastern Ukraine, especially in the Donetsk area, and it is firing on all cylinders to try and capture the whole of Donetsk before the end of the current calendar year. Let me make it very plain. The Russians, as I mentioned at the outset, are just 3 kilometers from Petrovsk, the most strategic logistical bottleneck, communication bottleneck in Donetsk. It's just 3 kilometers from there, and it is just about 8 kilometers from Dnieper, right? All its 3 battle groups, the battle group center, battle group Yug, and the battle group in the south, Zapad, are going full lick to achieve their objectives, to capture the whole of Luhansk and Donetsk and secure the land bridge to Crimea in a manner that Putin is able to achieve the entire operations, territorial objectives of his special military operation. As part of this, it is, like I said, speeding up its offensives. It has captured about 220 square kilometers in this month of December alone. It's captured about 16 major settlements and villages and towns of small consequence in eastern Ukraine, and its troops are moving forward relentlessly. Please don't forget, this is the most heavily fortified area in Ukraine and in the world. Since 2014, the Ukrainians have had time to build tire after tire after tire of very strong defenses. The problem for Ukraine is that the pressure now is so much that once Russia breaches the Petrovsk line, reaches the Kramatorsk line, but there is nothing beyond. It can go all the way up to the Dnieper River, and that is Putin's objective. That he will try and take the whole of Donetsk before the end of this calendar year. He is mounted an all-out drive. Before Donald Trump comes to power, he should have reached, or he hopes to reach, the Dnieper River line. That is his maximal objective, so that is a defensible line of the Dnieper River, a major river, and makes a very, very, very sensible geographical border, defensible border. In Kursk, Russia is going all out, again firing on all cylinders. The North Koreans have launched massive attacks, and they claim to have killed hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers. They have used a mine shaft again to come behind and take some very strategic areas that will cut off the line of supply of the Kursk salient, where the Ukrainians have thrown in their best troops, their Yager Brigade, their 150th Brigade. But these brigades are now showing signs of cracking up and strain under constant bombardment by FAB bombs, drones, missiles, artillery, and of course the Russians have realized that because of the drone warfare, tanks have very less chances of survival. There can be no mass tank attacks of the Second World War style that was the standard staple of the Russian war machine. So they have innovated, they have adjusted very, very well, and they are launching small scale infantry attacks using the cover of the tree lines, which is quite extensive in the Kursk salient, and they have been making steady gains. 45% of the area that Ukraine had captured in this location, they have already taken. But they are going beyond this, because Ukraine is also throwing everything into this. It has made Kursk a prestige battle. They have thrown in their best formations at the cost of losing eastern Ukraine. They have brought in their best formations in that sudden surprise attack, which the American satellites had detected the gap for them. They exploited the gap and they made a headway. And before the Russians could stabilize, they had taken a fair amount of territory in the Kursk salient. But they were about 60 kilometers short of the Kursk nuclear plant. That is still a bridge too far as a ground offensive is concerned. I'll come to that a little later when I cover Ukraine's strategy. But right now, there are strong reports and even aerial photography of Russian tanks, T-90 tanks being moved forward, train loads of them being moved forward. A Russian new formation, not the center, not the Zapad, not the Yug, but the O. It's a formation with the sign O on its vehicles, which has been moved into Belarus. And don't forget that from Belarus, Kyiv is just 90 kilometers away, right? So are there plans for a surprise Russian all-out offensive towards Kyiv? Makes a lot of strategic sense. You see, in Second World War, Marshal Zhukov had husbanded the reserve with which he wanted to launch a counter-offensive in winter, when he knew the Russian troops would have the advantage over the Germans. The Germans, who were on the gates of Moscow, would be exhausted. There were so many appeals to him to try and use that reserve. But Zhukov, with an iron will and an iron resolve, refused to be taken in by any of these entreaties. He refused to part with that central reserve that he had carefully husbanded and kept to launch a winter offensive, once the gates of Moscow had been reached by the German armed forces. And he did just that. So, when the reports came that the North Korean troops were now, Russia was asking for North Korean troops, about 12,000 of them, to fight in the Kursk salient. There was speculation, is this the end of the barrel as far as the Russian manpower is concerned? Are they in such dire straits as far as manpower is concerned? There were lots of talks about reserve, about 250 to 300,000 Russian soldiers, which were ready and willing and all on the starter blocks to start an offensive towards either Kyiv or Dnipro or towards Odessa. These are the three speculated objectives of the Russian counter-offensive that was people were expecting would come any day. But when the North Korean troops began to make their appearance in the Kursk salient, people were quite surprised. Was this the end of the road as far as Russian manpower was concerned? Was Putin going to stick blindly that he would not use the conscripts? There are about 200,000, 250,000 conscripts in Russia, which have not been committed into the battle, so far. Because in 2022, February, these are the conscripts which have taken the heaviest losses. They were not these short-term inductees. They performed badly in such intensive combat. And that was the lesson learned then. So, Putin had promised them that he would not use them as cannon fodder. But will he now do so? Will he now use this strategic reserve to launch a major and a surprise counter-offensive towards Kyiv? It may not be a full-scale offensive of that scale, because the objective may be to put such pressure towards Kyiv that Ukraine is forced to withdraw the balanced forces out of Kursk and use them for the defense of Kyiv, the capital itself. So this seems to be the indirect strategy, because attacking frontally in Kursk seems to be that the Russians have been taking heavy casualties in the bargain. So Russians are stepping on the gas, but if they want to avoid large scale casualties in frontal direct approaches, then the only counter is to launch an attack via Belarus towards Kyiv. And if possible, if they can make it in one fierce offensive towards Kyiv, if that makes a breakthrough, if they put all their firepower into it, all their Iskander missiles, their hypersonic missiles and their fab 2,000 and 3,000 bombs with all that artillery and massive ordnance, if they can blast their way to Kyiv or at least get close to it, they could engineer a kind of a coup in which the Kyiv regime is either deposed or forced to flee to western Ukraine to evacuate the capital if he goes for an all-out offensive. It would be costly, but then if Putin wants to end the war on his terms, that is the only logical strategy. If he doesn't go the whole hog, even then if he launches an offensive towards Kyiv, it will mount indirect pressure on Kursk and Ukraine will have no option but to pull out its troops. So they hit the GBU headquarters, they hit the Patriot missile battery at the airfield in Kyiv, right, and destroyed it, right. They hit the power infrastructure in Kyiv proper, right. 6 power plants, etc., power stations were hit. 60,000 people had to face total blackouts, no power, no lifts, no heating, no warming with minus 10 degrees centigrade temperatures. The people of Kyiv had been made quite miserable. And you see, these power outages also affect the production of your factories. Factories producing drones, factories producing missiles and munitions. This was the Russian strategy. So far, they have exercised restraint. They have confined themselves to, they have not even repeated the Oreshnik strike. They had done one as a demonstration strike. For these ones, they have used the shorter range Iskandars and Kinzhal hypersonic missiles with a terrific amount of kinetic energy which can penetrate deep and cause heavy damage, prohibitive damage in fact. So this has been the Russian strategy so far. How about the Ukrainians? Zelensky knows one thing for sure. He is losing the war on the ground. The Russians are advancing relentlessly, slowly, because they have to fight heavily built up defenses which have been in existence since 2014. Defensive lines which Ukraine has prepared at leisure. Very few areas in the world today are so heavily defended as the Donetsk and Luhansk area, where fighting has been going on, like I said, for over a decade. Over a decade. Now, to make penetrations there, to overcome defensive, especially in built-up area, you see the kind of fighting that took place in Bakhmut, in Chasiv Yar, it's still taking place, etc. Advances are painfully slow. They are a meat grinder war. But despite the meat grinder nature of the war, the Russians have innovated. They've stopped using mass tank assaults. They are using very highly trained infantry squads which are coming on motorcycles, which are coming on fast attack vehicles, dune buggies, etc., using tree lines and using tactical infiltration as was used in the closing stages of World War I by the German stormtroopers, right? And they have made slow but relentless progress. Like I said, they are not advancing a couple of 100 meters a day. They are capturing hundreds of square kilometers in a month, and their rate of gain of territory is in terms of square kilometers now, not hundreds of meters, but square kilometers every day that they are advancing relentlessly, they are pressing ahead. So Ukraine knows that it has lost the ground war. its response has been to try and win the battle of optics, win the battle of the TV screens. And it started with the use of the ATACMS, of the HIMARS, of the Storm Shadows, and the Scalp French cruise missiles. It has used them in fair profusion along with the drones. The UJ-22 drones specifically have done a lot of damage. They have a range of almost 700 kilometers and a charge they carry of about 20 to 25 kilograms of explosives. And these are the ones that some of them have been fired from Ukraine proper, but they've been fired into the depth areas where quite obviously as far back as Kazan was deemed so safe that the BRIC summit was held there. There's not much air defense artillery in Kazan. Way back, the air defense artillery is all towards the border. So if you can cross the border, you can launch these attacks. If you can penetrate that by electronic suppression or by launching these drones by local agents from around the vicinity of Kazan. That is the other speculation as to how they have been able to penetrate the tremendous air defensive power of the Russian air defense arm, PVO Strany. PVO Strany is formidable in terms of the S-300s, S-400s, and now the S-500s, and penetrating that level of air defense is a formidable task. But then doing it in the depth areas like Kazan, which was felt so safe that the BRIC summit was held there. So they have been, with the help of the CIA. Look, the war from the American side is being fought and directed primarily by the CIA and the State Department. The Pentagon, as of now, has very little to do with this war, right? It is the CIA which has been using its deep assets to wage a covert war against Russia, using Ukraine as a proxy. So they have tried to win the war of optics by launching attacks on Kazan, by launching attacks on some of their oil refineries, chemical plants, which are easy to put on fire. But the Russians have been able to shoot down quite a few. But those that have penetrated have created high visibility optics. That is the Ukrainian strategy so far, to win the war of the optics, to keep a show of defiance and resistance going, to enthuse Donald Trump that, look, we are still in the fight, we have not been knocked out, we have not been made horsey combat, we are still fighting. So that may possibly encourage Donald Trump that, well, seems to be a winning proposition, or at least we can fight it to a stalemate. That is what the Americans are trying to do. That is what the NATO is trying to do. Save face. Freeze the conflict in situ, like the Korean War had been frozen in situ and has been there frozen since 1953. So there would be no victory for Russia. They are very keen to avoid a high visibility win for the Russians. That would be a disaster for the American image of infallibility, invincibility, etc., etc. So, Ukraine's second pincer of the strategy is to somehow hold on to Kursk. Hold on, put up fierce resistance as much as they can in eastern Ukraine, but they know that that's a foregone conclusion, that's a battle already lost. They are trying to fight a grim rearguard action. They have been, the Russian strategy is to create pockets, to put pincers and envelop pockets of Ukrainian forces. So then their option is either to retreat or to lose the forces that are in the pocket. Increasingly, previously the Ukrainian soldiers were retreating, coming out of these pockets, but increasingly it is now looking that they are prepared to sacrifice their forces. Morale is plummeting. There have been over 1 lakh desertions, 100,000 desertions in the Ukrainian army. The troops are fed up, they are not well trained, they are picking up people from the streets, snatching teenagers from their homes and throwing them into the battle with minimal training of 1 week or 10 days. and that is cannon fodder. And the relief of troops in contact, the Russians are rotating their troops to give them that rest and relief. The Ukrainians are not. They are short of manpower. About 40 million Ukrainians that were there, about 8 million Ukrainians have fled the country. And the balance, they have taken over 1 million casualties they have taken. 1 million killed and wounded in a bad shape, and plus some rendered hostile combat, right? Ukrainians are desperately short of manpower. The Americans are forcing them, fighting to the last Ukrainian. They are forcing Ukraine to now, pull out the teenagers from their homes. The mobilization age has been reduced from 25 to 18. They're getting the young men out and using them as cannon fodder. This is not likely to last. They are short of ammunition. They are outclassed in terms of firepower, and they are short of manpower, and it is beginning to tell. So they are trying desperately to hang on to Kursk. They have brought in their best formations and troops, which are also now showing signs of cracking up. And the answer, if the Russians open up the front in Belarus, that would create problems for Ukraine in trying to hang on to their gains in the Kursk salient. So if you lose eastern Ukraine, you lose the Kursk salient, you have very little to show when you go to negotiations. And the cracking up of Ukrainian staying power and morale is visible for all to see. So what next? Let's wargame and stick our neck out and try and prognosticate the future of the battle in Ukraine. Chances are very strong that Russia will now launch a surprise offensive through Belarus towards Kyiv. Don't forget, Kyiv is just 90 kilometers from the Belarusian border. This is the way they had attacked also in February 2022. And they had almost reached the gates of Kyiv. Of course, then it was a two-pronged attack. One was coming from Kharkov side, and the other was coming from the Belarus side. But they had reached the gates of Kyiv, almost the outskirts of Kyiv. They had captured the Hostomel airfield in Kyiv. They had landed airborne troops there, etc. But instead of securing the airhead, they had gone in straight for an attack on Kyiv itself. They were perhaps misled that some of the Kyiv's people had pretended that they were on their side, etc., and they would do a coup from within as these airborne forces, Chechens, etc., attacked from the Hostomel airfield. That did not happen. And then, of course, Putin wanted to go in for talks. Talks were held first in Belarus, then they were held in Turkey, and as a result of that, they had almost reached an agreement. That agreement was torpedoed by Prime Minister Boris Johnson, former of the United Kingdom, who went to Kyiv and read the Riot Act out to Zelensky that you will bloody well fight. We don't care how many Ukrainians you lose, but you will fight, you will throw them out of your territory. I mean, we saw what throwing out was done. That whole 2023 counter-offensive of the Ukrainians was a tragic fiasco. It led to the loss of lakhs and lakhs, hundreds and thousands of Ukrainian soldiers. The Russians just put up an absolute Maginot Line in the entire border, and they were able to beat back every single attack. They couldn't penetrate beyond the forward zone. They couldn't even reach the main defenses. So the fact of the matter is that Russia could now open an offensive, a major offensive towards Kyiv. If it is not a major offensive, or if it doesn't succeed, at the very least it will help to draw out Ukrainian forces from Kursk, force them to come to the defense of the capital, because they have also thinned out their troops from in front of the capital. The Russian satellites have discovered that, and they are trying to make a headway there. They will also try and secure the line of the Dnieper River. Putin has given orders to now go all out. They will accept heavy casualties, but before 20th of January, Putin hopes to have secured the whole of Donetsk and Luhansk, and he would possibly be able to get to the line of the Dnieper River, because there is nothing beyond the Kramatorsk line. Petrovsk, Kramatorsk line, there is nothing beyond. They'll have to build new defenses, and that is why Putin doesn't want to give the Ukrainians a reprieve in which they can build new defense lines. They don't have the manpower. Now the same people will have to retreat and build something there, and if they are in their desperation to hang on to as much real estate as possible to try and impress Donald Trump, well, they are going to lose a lot of their forces in these pockets that the Russians call them cauldrons. In those cauldrons, they try and put pincers around and then try and leave a window through which the Ukrainians either move out or they are destroyed within the pocket. Increasingly, the Ukrainians were initially moving out. Now they are getting destroyed within that particular pocket. Will Donald Trump be able to enforce a ceasefire on day one? Doubtful, very doubtful. That Trump's envoy, the American general, is there talking to these people. Putin has said he is agreeable to a summit meeting between him and Trump. He sees Trump as genuinely seeking peace, and though they did express some reservations that increasingly Trump was talking the talk of the Biden democratic dispensation. So will this ceasefire happen? There was one school of thought that Russia has learned the lesson in Syria. They had accepted a ceasefire in situ, allowed Idlib, 100,000 terrorists to stay on alive in Idlib, and 3-4 years down the line they were retrained, re-weaponized and used to get the Russians out of Syria, right? So will Putin make the same mistake again? Will Putin accept European troops? That's a big no. So will there be neutral troops either from Asia or anywhere else in the world who could be brought in like UN contingents to man the demilitarized zone? That remains to be seen. Something will have to be worked out, but Russia is also saying that it will sign a peace pact with a legitimate government, and it doesn't consider the Zelensky regime as legitimate because his tenure is over and they haven't held elections again, because it says that any long-term agreement that it wants is an agreement that should be able to stick. What if that doesn't work out? Let's wargame a bit further. What if that doesn't really work out? In that case, what we could see is a horizontal escalation. Russia has already demonstrated the power of its Oreshnik hypersonic IRBMs. And one of the first targets that it could strike is in Poland. Just 200 kilometers from the Ukrainian border is the Bisezau airport, through which all the NATO and American supplies are being fed into Ukraine. Russia could hit that and cause a major escalation, because then it would be hitting a NATO country. It could hit the American air base in Poland, because that is the country through which all the supplies are coming. It could also then go in for major American or British air bases all over Europe and especially in the United Kingdom. Well, that means it's World War III for sure, and it can easily escalate to a nuclear Armageddon. We all hope, the world will pray, that Donald Trump is able to bring about a ceasefire and some modicum of peace, at least for a few years before the fighting erupts all over again. But we are living in extremely dangerous times. Like I mentioned, there is also the wild card scenario that Biden, before he goes, will ensure that he pokes Putin so badly in the eye that he is forced to retaliate, cross the nuclear Rubicon, or go in for horizontal escalation into NATO territory. And that means World War III. And would the deep state then exploit that to say, oh, there is a national emergency and power cannot be handed over to Donald Trump? That's a bizarre scenario. It's a wild card right now, far-fetched scenario, but one that we cannot completely rule out. So Putin is very sensibly exercising tremendous amount of restraint for the time being. What happens after 20th of January, time alone will tell. Thank you.